Like, listen, Mark, I don't like Stanley.
Stanley, the Navy man, thinks he's so wise. He reads all
I think the only person
books
that has
with
been
a
was Stanley.
squint in his eyes, spins still so wild, like ships in the sky. But whose words
And Nate, Stanley doesn't state the obvious. Like,
You don't think one parent influence is detrimental?
Yes, he does.
I literally said they need to understand that it's a white people problem. Okay,
It's called Stanley versus the world.
And just assume their character by stereotype?
I think people do that every day.
Okay, I didn't ask you.
What do I think it's okay?
Last night, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Yale professor David Blight said this about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's opinion in the birthright citizenship case.
I already emailed the executive director of the Organization of American Historians, and I said, is there any way we could put Jackson's opinion in the next issue of the Journal of American History? Because frankly, Lawrence, it reads like a historical essay. It is a historical essay. It's deeply researched. She not only quotes from me or quotes Frederick Douglass several times, but 6, 7 other historians, the best historians of Reconstruction. And, you know, it sets up her essential argument, which is that Section 1 of the 14th, and especially birthright citizenship, is rooted in universalist principles.
Justice Jackson's opinion also cited our next guest, also a Pulitzer Prize winner, Isabel Wilkerson, and her book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. Justice Jackson included this quote from the book in her opinion. A caste system is an artificial construction of fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits that would be neutral in the abstract, but are ascribed life and death meaning in a hierarchy favoring the dominant caste whose forebears designed it. And in a passage reflecting Isabel Wilkerson's thinking about caste, Justice Jackson wrote, "The firmest foundation for freedom would require an anti-caste reset, both for his sake and for ours, and would benefit all." Joining us now is Isabel Wilkerson, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of the New York Times bestseller, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents. Isabel, thank you very much for joining us again tonight. And as I was reading that opinion yesterday, I was thinking about you on every other line, eager to hear what you had to say about it. And what did you feel? What were you feeling when that opinion came out and when you got a chance to read it?
Well, I was feeling all kinds of things. I mean, first of all, she's brilliant. She's not just a Supreme Court justice, but she's also a historian. She is a researcher. She's a scholar. And so to see that this book and its concepts were cited in her concurrence for this monumental historic decision, I was absolutely floored. I was stunned. I was honored beyond belief. This is a book I actually didn't even want to write. It was a book that I felt compelled to write because of the circumstances in which we find ourselves as a nation. And I thought that this would be a way to shine a light on sort of an X-ray of our country, using language that a lot of Americans are not accustomed to, but steeped in history. And the idea that this is now incorporated into the body of this august piece of work that she's created, for all time. I mean, for it to have reached the highest levels of the land is just really astounding to me. And I'm so incredibly grateful and humbled to know that it's there.
So it seems like one of the simpler Supreme Court cases of our lives, really. Just what do these simple words of the Constitution actually mean? That words that have been completely clear to us for our entire lives suddenly became a subject of debate in that Supreme Court. And I said last night that I had a feeling that one way of doing this is just a one-word decision saying, this is what it means and we're done. But the concurrence by Justice Jackson, which she didn't have to write, she could have just joined the majority opinion, she's one of the yes votes, seems to reveal the importance of having this range of experience on the Supreme Court, something that Joe Biden obviously recognized in his choice of this justice.
Well, the genealogists have found that her ancestors on both sides were from Georgia. They were enslaved people in Georgia, and there are records that show that some of her ancestors have been, which is very, very common, have been sharecroppers, because that's what happened after the Civil War, as opposed to truly letting go of slavery. They created a new form of slavery. And so this is deeply embedded in the history of so many African Americans. And she, I feel, in the work that she did, was channeling the ancestors, and what was on their hearts and their minds and their dreams. And one of the things that she says so clearly is that when they were seeking to be recognized as citizens, they were not looking merely for themselves, which speaks to the role that African Americans have had in American history throughout the experience on this soil. And that is that they were looking for this to be, they were essentially seeing themselves as the vanguard, in the forefront of rights for all marginalized people. And essentially their suffering and their sacrifices made a way for all people, regardless of where they might have been in the hierarchy.
It was fascinating to see, in the opinion, Frederick Douglass still to this day influencing the thinking and the results in American government in Washington, D.C. Just repeated references to him in the opinion.
It was an honor to be in such an august company, to tell you the truth. I want to say that I just find it so fitting that the Supreme Court, for all of its mysteries, reaffirmed birthright citizenship, the foundation of what it means to be an American. And, to do this on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the United States, I think is extremely meaningful. It reinforces the language that she was using also, which was this idea of the second founding, which was the remaking of the country through the Reconstruction Amendments, after essentially the Civil War practically broke the country apart. So what it does is it calls upon us to recognize that, unlike the old country where from which we declared independence, we are a nation of people from all over the world. And we, together made a country that had never existed before. And so the idea of this being reaffirmed on the eve of the 250th anniversary feels like it's a full circle recognition, particularly with all that we've been through as a nation in the last, in recent times. This seems like a fitting moment for this to have happened.
Well, welcome to Stanley versus the World, folks. I am way late. I was messing around on other panels and had a good old time, but it was time to come back home. So everyone, please make sure you hit the like button, especially if you're hearing this on a replay. Hold on one
beginning
sec
with
here.
Senator Lyman Trump.
One sec. So, give me one sec here. Having a little technical difficulty. Something is playing when it shouldn't be. There. Huh. Boy, I'm getting old. So anyway, if you are new to the show, please make sure you subscribe, especially if you're coming over from one of the other shows that I was on earlier. It's a little bit less combative most of the time on this show. But hey, a little bit of verbal jousting never hurt anyone. Support the show by supporting the host. I actually have Cash App. I'm sorry, I actually have PayPal now. So if you're listening in from Cambodia, we will take. Apparently, they use U.S. currency, so it will be easy to support this show. You know who you are, son. What else? We're gonna not do it many news articles today because I'm way late, and I'm sitting here just kind of verbally jousting and didn't get a chance to read a whole lot of newspapers. But once again, we're going to concentrate on the Supreme Court, and apparently, we're going to concentrate on Justice Jackson and the elder statesman of the Supreme Court, Justice Thomas. She went after him in her dissent and essentially called him a hypocrite, which I thought was she didn't use the word, but she said his dissent was surprising. and it made me chuckle when I read it. So who says Supreme Court justices don't have a sense of humor and are not entertaining? So let us listen to this second little news piece or opinion piece about Ketanji Brown Jackson, the next Supreme Court Chief Justice, in my opinion.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson highlighted the legislative history of birthright citizenship, beginning with Senator Lyman Trumbull's advocacy of the Civil Rights Act of 1886. She wrote, Senator Lyman Trumbull's first proposal honed in on the freedmen and provided merely that all persons of African descent born in the United States are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. If that language had prevailed, the view Justice Thomas asserts today might be well-founded. But Senator Trumbull changed his mind. The day after he submitted that first proposal, he requested to withdraw the original and offer another in lieu of it to the same purport, changing the phraseology. Consistent with the views espoused by activists, Trumbull's new proposal adopted a distinctly universalist register. All persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States without any distinction of color. This is the language Congress would eventually enact as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And
let me stop this right here. And this is what all these people who don't seem to be able to understand English very well. When a baby is born here, even if the parents are illegal in the country, they're not subject to that foreign power. If you're born and not subject, a baby born here is not subject. If they're born here, they're subject to Americans or America. People don't understand what jurisdiction means, and you can add meaning, you can add domicile, you can do all this stuff, concentrating on the parents, but parents aren't born. They give birth. The baby is born. And people don't seem to be able to, build that very, in my mind, very obvious point. And obviously, neither is Clarence Thomas. Domicile, the Constitution doesn't talk about domicile.
The Civil Rights Act of 1866 would go on to become the basis for the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. Senator Trumbull's progression from specific to universal was more than mere word choice. In the face of the virulent anti-immigrant and in particular the anti-Chinese and anti-Romani sentiment of that era, language targeting just freed former slaves would have been the path of least or less resistance. But Senator Trumbull, along with those colleagues who took up the same mantle during the ratification debates, expressly rejected that narrow framing. And joining us now is David Blight, Yale University professor of history and Black studies. He's the author of the Pulitzer Prize winning book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. And Professor Blight, Justice Jackson quoted your book and your writing in her opinion today. We just heard Professor Tribe talk about the historical references made by the justices. And I know this is always an interesting exercise for you to read the amateur historian work done in Supreme Court opinions. What was your reading of this one today?
Justice Jackson was not an amateur today. Quite the opposite. In fact, I already emailed the executive director of the Organization of American Historians, and I said, is there any way we could put Jackson's opinion in the next issue of the Journal of American History? Because frankly, Lawrence, it reads like a historical essay. It is a historical essay. It's deeply researched. She not only quotes from me or quotes Frederick Douglass several times, but 6, 7 other historians, the best historians of Reconstruction. And, you know, it sets up her essential argument, which is that Section 1 of the 14th, and especially birthright citizenship, is rooted in universalist principles. And she even ends by not only, you know, quoting Douglass, which, by the way, at least 3 of the 9 justices did in today's opinions. Thomas did too, of course. Thomas loves Frederick Douglass for his own peculiar ways, but even Justice Roberts quoted Douglass at the very beginning. But
you know, and I commented on this yesterday. Frederick Douglass, as famous as he is here in 2026, he literally needs to be on a dollar bill or something like that. You got the Supreme Court fucking quoting the dude for their own purposes, of course. Clarence Thomas, much like Professor Blight said, for his own peculiar reasons. I read Clarence Thomas's dissent, and the dude cherry picked his argument to hell and back. He quotes like 3 or 4 words, but never quotes a paragraph or anything longer than those 3 or 4 words in context. That's what people do when they try and piecemeal an argument. Clarence Thomas argues the 14th Amendment is colorblind, and then I think he literally used the term black slaves. So is it colorblind or not? The 14th Amendment, I guess it's only colorblind when, in a very Thomas soul way, it suits this far right perspective of Clarence Thomas. He is very strange.
Justice Jackson ends by going to a section in my book. It was so moving to me, I must tell you, where it's 1866. Frederick Douglass is out on the circuit. He's arguing for the 14th Amendment. He's making the case that the country has to get behind this. And he does what he always did. He went to the Old Testament. He went to Genesis. And Justice Jackson quotes the passage from Genesis 18:19, where it's God wrecking holy hell on Sodom and Gomorrah, and there's nothing left of the towns. It's just all burnt earth. And then he has Abraham, the prophet, overlooking the scene and saying, nations must have memories. Nations must remember this. And of course, the metaphor is Americans have just experienced their civil war, and they're now remaking themselves. Remember as you remake yourselves. That was Jackson going to a source to make a universalist point, a universalist argument about the meaning of birthright citizenship. And I have to say, she took on her colleague, Justice Thomas, directly. She took him to the shed. I mean, she ripped him for his misuses of history and his, frankly, 80 whatever page meandering analysis of this idea of domicile and this idea that the
Yeah. Where is domicile talked about in the 14th Amendment? Dude, I spent the day, and Mariah's gonna fuss at me or shake her head. Dude, I just, you can only take a horse or lead a horse to the water. It's like, dude, it was like, who was it? Damn it. I'm stuck in the middle again. Is it the Steve Miller Band? I got clowns to the right of me, jokers to the left of me, stuck in the middle again. That's how I felt all fucking day. It's like I went from CM to another Joker's panel. I had CM the clown and Balba the Joker. I'm stuck in the middle again, trying to educate these folks. And I literally spent all this time and I just tried to kind of joke my way through it. But dude, people keep telling me what I think. They don't say, do you mean? They don't ask the question. They keep going. Well, Stanley, you think this, you are that. Dude, you're not bright enough to fucking tell me what I think. No one's a mind reader. And then this silly woman comes up telling me that I claim something. Like, no, I don't. Where in what I said can you prove me wrong? Okay, I can prove me right, but you need to prove me wrong. Something as simple as there are socialist elements in our United States mixed economy, and they wanted to argue this. Like, literally, there's Social Security. That's all I need to say. Dude, these people argue from positions of ignorance, and then they want to debate it. I don't debate. Why the fuck would I debate what I know and can prove? I don't do debates, folks. Unless it's a good reason to debate. Maybe I'll mix it up back and forth if it's fun with someone like Deacon Dave or SKC or, someone of that ilk. But dude, I don't debate people I don't know, especially if you can barely speak English. Fuck.
Jurisdiction thereof, and this idea that it's going to be wandering foreigners, and he even uses that term, strangers, foreigners wandering through this country demanding citizenship. It was such an ugly, in Thomas's case, an ugly kind of argument against immigration. He converted his 80-some page dissent into a frankly ugly argument against immigration. And Justice Jackson called him.
My great grandfather moved his family here when my grandfather was about 8 years old, and my grandfather then was able to become a citizen, and then his children then had birthright citizenship, and I'm the second generation of birthright citizenship here. And it seems one just wonders how Samuel Alito thinks he got his citizenship in this country.
Well, I can't answer for what's exactly in Samuel Alito's head or Clarence Thomas's or Kavanaugh's. But what they really have is essentially a political and racial ideology. They have a racial vision of this country. They have a political and racial ideology. And
let me just pause this. I know I keep pausing this. I usually like to let things play for context, but I literally had someone tell me who has visited the United States. Dude, we are literally talking about a 14th Amendment that pivoted on race. Do these people not know? Well, some of these people actually do not know American history, and that's perfectly fine if you're not from here. I don't know other countries' histories in detail, but the nerve of these dumb fucks actually telling me I don't know what I know. Look, I've been reading American history since I was probably like 6 years old, checking out the books from the Bull Street Library in Savannah, Georgia. My mother was a history buff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the gall of some of these people, they will tell me, but they won't ask me. I know American culture because not only was I born into it and lived it, I've studied it. I'm not a sociologist, I'm not an academic, but I know enough to hold my own on a fucking YouTube panel. And these people, dude, I got called porch monkey, I got called the N word, and then it was laughed off. And then I was asked if I'm a racist. I literally, dude, it was an abomination. And people think that shit should go unanswered. And then when I clap back, they get in their feelings. CM, Balba, these motherfuckers are lightweights. And they cannot handle me when I go up to their panel because I'm sure of my stuff. I will fuck you up on your own panel because shit, at this point, I don't respect CM's intelligence. He needs to listen and be taught. He does not teach me. And I don't debate fools or ignorance. And Balba, that's kind of surprising. Dude has never lived here, but he wants to tell me about the United States of these Americas. Dude, I'm not going to debate ignorance.
Search of a history that's not there. But they're going to insist on finding one. And frankly, Lawrence, I had this reaction today, and I've had it for actually months. Most Americans are going to think about their grandparents and great-grandparents and so on when they hear about.
Well, Yeti, yeah, I'll have a look at it. But it's so weird. Donald Trump is kind of a weird character. Look, let's think about YouTube. People don't really understand race and racism in America. It is no surprise that Jesse Jackson would be supported by Donald Trump. But you got to remember, Donald Trump is very transactional. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. And let me just make this quick analogy. And I've used it so many times. It's an aphorism, actually. Donald Trump likes Black culture, but he doesn't particularly like Black individuals. And the opposite in the South. In the South, your next door neighbor might be your best friend, but he doesn't particularly like Black culture. It's a weird dichotomy. Donald Trump he's a deal maker. He's transactional. He would support a Jesse Jackson because Jesse Jackson, it was a thing to do. People like Donald Trump always have reasons to do stuff. Businessmen tend to be transactional. It's not even that much of a criticism. It's just not surprising. Donald Trump didn't like Barack Obama because Barack Obama made a joke. And Barack Obama, well, shit, Jesse Jackson didn't like Barack Obama that much. And you know what? Probably the term that Jesse Jackson got in trouble way back in the day, the High Me Town comment, dude, Donald Trump would be on board with that. You're not old enough probably to remember. Jesse Jackson got in a little bit of hot water for calling New York City that. And that's these guys, some of these old style politicians, dude, they were rough and tumble. And that's just the way politics was back then. But no, Donald Trump supporting Jesse Jackson. Shoot, there's a picture of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Jesse Jackson, I think he was in Congress for some award or something like that. There's a picture of Jesse Jackson. He was wheelchair bound not too long before he died. Marjorie Taylor Greene is shaking his hand, and look, the picture looks like she's just being all gracious. And I know Marjorie Taylor Greene's district is like one county up from where I live, probably 40 minutes from where I live. Dude, I would never tend to think of Marjorie Taylor Greene as even liking Black people that much. But race in America is very complicated. You know, when someone tells me, well, oh, hey, you know, I married a Black woman, I can't be racist. Fuck yeah, you can. Race is way more complicated in the United States. Thomas Jefferson, literally, and Sally Hemings, she was his slave and he never freed her, even after he died. So, but who am I to say he didn't love her? And once he died, Sally Hemings, probably the only reason they didn't free her is they just wanted, you know, it's kind of a patrician thing. She was free to go about her way once Jefferson died, but technically she was still a slave. Race in America is complicated. American culture is very complicated. And, you know, there are probably more exceptions than there are rules if you think about it. So anyway, I'm babbling.
About this decision. We've all got this story, millions and millions of us. My German-born grandparents came here in the late 1890s. My mother was born here and is hence a citizen, and therefore I am. I mean, it's that simple. And we've all got that story. I mean, virtually everyone. But this is, and this idea, Alito, what does he do? He goes in the first paragraph of his dissent, he goes to this business of birth tourism. This is what I mean by an ideology in search of a history. They're reaching.
Wow.
I mean, it's painful almost to read how much they are reaching to try to twist the birthright citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment into something that would fit this racial and political ideological vision of this country. And I share Professor Tribe's fear that this really is a 5-4 decision. When you read Kavanaugh saying, okay, it's really up to Congress, go ahead, Congress. That's how close we are. And frankly, let's admit it again. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment is what holds this country together. What else has held us together for 160 years? But this idea of our pluralism. It's really messy. We have terrible conflicts. We always will. But Section 1 of the 14th Amendment is it's like the angel hovering over us. That whatever else we do wrong, whatever, missteps we make in the world, we've still got that. It still holds us together as a community, whatever we are, whoever we are, color, religion, anything. It's the 14th Amendment that remade the United States. That's what the new founding really is. The new founding is not just in Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, but without it, there would have been no refounding.
Pulitzer Prize winning historian David Blight, such an honor to have you join us tonight. Thank you very much for the important work you've done that was cited by the Supreme Court today, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Wow.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Yeah. So that was David Blight, and David Blight is like a legend. He wrote the last and probably best biography of Frederick Douglass. Um, you know, Douglas's autobiographies, are better because he actually wrote them. But David Blight is a legend, and he's an expert on things like the 14th Amendment. So I highly recommend that y'all get that biography of Frederick Douglass. It's long, but it is very good. It won a Pulitzer Prize. So we're going to look at one more thing, and there'll be several others, but the initial analysis of this Clarence Thomas versus Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yeah, Justice Thomas is not going to win this. He keeps with this old shit. He's not a historian, obviously. It's a conservative thing, I guess. So, poor Clarence Thomas. I don't think history's going to treat him very well, to be honest. He's problematic, and it's not that I even dislike him. He's just weird. So let's listen to this. Unfortunately, there's no video, but it's about 11 minutes.
Birthright citizenship, as the Supreme Court delivered a decision that people are celebrating, but I think this is
What's up, Ola?
This is a temporary, light, and momentary. They're coming back. They're coming back. You want to know how I know? Because Clarence Thomas basically said it in his dissent. Again, if you read, you can go to SCOTUS blog, which is Supreme Court of the United States. That's SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States blog. Or you can go to supremecourt.gov, which is where I printed out the decision. You can read it. As Dr. Carr said yesterday, it's accessible. Some of the language, no, it's all in English. And the language is not a whole lot of legal jargon. You can get through it. The citizenship clause, it reads, must be understood in light of its historical context. From the English common law to the widespread condemnation of the court's decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford. And it goes into all of what that means. Children born within dominions owned a natural allegiance to the sovereign who protected them at birth. This is what they upheld. But it can just as easily be overturned with a court that says so. And they're already teetering, because while Beer Kavanaugh voted with the majority, he also filed an opinion concurring with the dissent that Clarence Thomas wrote. Clarence Thomas wrote the dissenting opinion. And I do think it's ironic that the only Black man on the Supreme Court, the one who replaced Thurgood Marshall on the Supreme Court, one of the most unremarkable, before Amy Coney Barrett, Clarence Thomas was unremarkable. They could have combed the universe for a Supreme Court justice that was conservative and remarkable, but they gave us this guy because obviously he's also compromisable. He was at Congress yesterday. Dr. Carr talked about that. In Congress, cackling and keying and guffawing and being very unprofessional. But we also know that he has taken money, that he has taken bribes, that he is not somebody that is to be trusted, not just with our future and our rights and things, but just period. He's a betrayer to himself and to our common humanity. He is a betrayer at the highest order. We can name call him all the things in the world, but he is doing exactly what he was placed there to do. So can you be mad? You should be mad at the people that elected Bush, that put him on the court to begin with. That should be the first source of anger, like at the people that.
Well, she's got a point. People just want to blame the politicians. It's the voters who put these people there that are the problem. Okay. Trump is a symptom, he is a problem, but not the problem. So, Clarence Thomas, I struggle to try and keep an open mind. But dude, I read a good portion of his 80-page dissent. It was egregious.
That elected this man to allow him to be able to replace the great Thurgood Marshall. And they did that on purpose. Replace Thurgood Marshall with somebody
That
so
they did.
incompetent,
That they did.
incapable, but he is doing what they placed him there to do. So he had to get that language right, because I don't know if he had it in him in his dissent, because that's going to be the case upon which they come back to try to do this again. And the irony is not lost on me that they had a black man write the dissent on citizenship. How ironic, how sad, how weird. And that this president would even sign an executive order challenging people whose parents weren't born here when all but one of his children are born to people not born here. But it also tells you how they don't give a damn. Elon Musk out here talking about people going back to their country. Elon Musk talking about people not supposed to be here, not belonging here. You're not supposed to be here. You don't belong here. Go back to your country. Why are you here? Why are you a white man from South Africa? Why are you here? Peter Thiel. I think he already left, though. They got everything that they needed out of this country. I think he's already gone. But yeah, no, it's a wild, wild thing that we're in right now. And I'm just curious how any of you are feeling about your citizenship. What does it even mean to be an American to you as we are heading into this 250th commemoration, this corridor? What do you feel? And then if you don't feel connected to this country, what's the solution? What are you going to do? Should you make this a more perfect union? Should you make this a place that we can all kind of figure out how to be here together? Or should we do something else? I don't know. I think of myself as a global citizen. I should be able to go anywhere in the world. That no man could put a border around my movements. But yet, my parents are, my grandparents are both buried here. My mom lives here. My family is, as I mentioned, 5 generations back. This is the only land that I know in terms of living. But I do know that the world is vast. And I think more of us need to travel so that we can stop with the lie that this is the best country in the world. It might be, but how would you know if you've never been anyplace else? We got a lot to consider. I think that these times make people, and complacency will be punished at this point. Doing nothing won't be the move. So you have to do something. And what is that something? Well, first and foremost, we got to vote in November. That's a non-negotiable. It's the least you can do. It's like the very, very bare minimum is make sure you show up and make sure everybody around you shows up. And I don't care how much they grumble and complain, challenge them. How hard is it to just show up and vote? And it doesn't matter who you vote for, because what the statistics show, when more people show up, more right votes get cast. So it's the 90 million that didn't show up that need to show up this time, because you didn't show up for us before, and that's why we're here. I'm not worried about the 77 million. They may be lost causes, and I don't think we can cajole them to do anything right. Let them continue to vote against their common interests and humanity and all the other things. But they're not the majority. They're not the majority. We are the global majority, and we are the majority here. And when I say we, I mean people of right minds and good hearts. The majority of us
on early
know what we should be doing. Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote the dissent in this birthright citizenship case. And she said, as to the introduction in part 1 concurring, I join the court's opinion in full. I write separately to respond to some of the themes in the principal dissent.
Let me talk to this silly young lady here. Rox, I don't disagree. Every other race can work together, but black people can't. Tina, do you even live in the United States? Dude, I went round and round with morons who do not understand American culture, never lived here. Dude, you don't learn American culture from a fucking TV screen or a movie screen. Every race works together. Give me one goddamn example, you silly woman, and Black Americans haven't worked together, you don't know enough American history to make that ignorant statement. Stop listening to these dumb fucks on YouTube panels and do your homework. I can give you all kinds of examples of Black people working together and thriving when they do. Where does this fucking ignorance come from? God damn. We got some stupid motherfuckers on these YouTube streets who are just anti-Black. Black people don't work together. Have you ever heard of the fucking US Civil War? Was that white people working together? Ma'am, you got to do better. And I'm not necessarily fussing with you because you're a young lady. You don't know much, obviously. Have you ever heard of the 100 Years' War in Europe or the 30 Years' War? The fuck are you talking about? People in the same country often fight each other. Are you saying left and right in the United States are working together? Ma'am, stop the cap. You just don't know enough or you don't think enough. And again, I'm kind of going gentle on you because you don't do politics. You just like, you look cute on a panel, and I appreciate your cuteness. But dude, don't mistake a low-cut dress for brains. My Lord.
The principal dissent, by the way, was written by Clarence Thomas. So Justice Jackson was like, yeah, no, I want to write. Now, I know John Roberts, Chief Justice, wrote the opinion, the concurring opinion. I need to write something because it's going to be in the records forever. And I encourage everybody to read. I'm just going to read the first paragraph from her dissent. She wrote, despite his longstanding endorsement of a, quote, colorblind constitution, Justice Thompson now surprisingly suggests that the citizenship clause was a race-conscious remedial measure. She called him a hypocrite in the first sentence. You are a hypocrite and a liar. You said you're colorblind. But then you write that the citizenship clause was a race-conscious remedial measure relating only to, quote, freed slaves such as Dred Scott and those who shared with them certain characteristics, people who look Black. It is for this reason, he says, that children, quote, children, this is what he wrote, children who were born in the United States but to parents not domiciled here are not entitled to claim birthright citizenship. She writes, but that narrow vision of the 14th Amendment bears little relationship to the history of its ratification. Even worse, Justice Thomas's telling elides the entire point of the second founding. The Reconstruction Amendments were an anti-caste, anti-subordination reset for the nation, not a mere spot treatment for the dark stain of slavery. And then she goes on. This woman, first of all, can write. She's brilliant. She's everything Judge Thomas could never be. Him and the pubic hair on his Coke can could never be. This woman is imbued with a knowledge of this Constitution that probably nobody else on the court. I think a few of them know some things, but this woman embodies it in a way that nobody else sitting on that court could ever. And I want to see more justices. This is why elections matter. Presidential elections matter, as Judge Laura was saying. Presidential elections matter because it allows you to have a Ketanji Brown Jackson on the court. I would like to see a Michelle Obama on the court. I would like to see maybe a Jasmine Crockett on the court. Why not? Next president, why not? Let's make it real groovy. Let's make it real funky. Let's make that Supreme Court the where they do their arguments. Let's make it real spicy. Let's put some people in there that are going to be like, nah, son, we're not.
Yeah, kind of like a YouTube panel. It should be.
Not doing that. And if we are doing that, I'm going to be very vociferous in my dissents, so that 100 years from now, they're gonna read this and go, "What the hell was going on in this country?" And ooh, who is this Ketanji Brown Jackson? She's amazing, or whomever, fill in the blank. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting ride that we're on. I'm here for it. But as I mentioned, affirmative action, they tried this back in 1978. As soon as it went into effect, they were challenging it. Soon as slavery ended, they were challenging it. Okay. These people never sleep. They say the lion never sleeps. They never sleep. They don't sleep. We can't sleep. Don't sleep on them. And don't look at it like, oh, I'm so tired of fighting. I'm tired of always having to fight. Let's have a good fight, for a good fight, because I feel like the Civil War wasn't done. That was another battle. It seemed like it was won by the North. I think they're still fighting it. Why else do you have these reenactments every year? They're still fighting it. We're the ones thinking it was over.
We're ready. We're prepared. Do not give in to fear. We are fearless. This is not the time.
And let me make one other point, kind of an addendum to Karen Hunter's point. I literally got asked on Balba's panel, like, prove that American culture is racist. And I'm like, what? Are you not familiar with a couple of Supreme Court decisions they made? Are you not familiar with American history? Have you not read a book called Racecraft? Have you not read Frederick Douglass? I am not going to sit here and prove the obvious to ignorant people. I'm the older I get, I'm really starting to appreciate that statement by John Henry Clark. I debate my equals. All others I teach, Balba, CM, all these dumb fucks. Dude, I'm not going to get up here and debate you on shit you don't know. Dude, it's a losing game to teach someone American history on a YouTube panel in 10 minutes. Dude, stop debating shit you don't know. And who is that silly woman who came up at the end of my time on Balba's panel telling me what I claim? Motherfucker, I'm not claiming shit. How about read up on the New Deal? If you read a high school history book, that's not good enough. That's high school history. If you don't understand that bailouts back in 2007, 2008, 2009, that was socializing companies too big to fail, that's socialism, not like full-blown socialism. But if the American people, if you take tax dollars and you buy into a company, that is partial ownership by the people. It doesn't have to be the people own 100% of the means of production. Owning a piece of it is a piece of owning the means of production. People literally do not understand the fucking uneducated arguments they try to make on these YouTube panels. And I don't have to be kind. If you are 30 or 40 or 50 and you don't know this shit, I'm not your goddamn teacher. Fucking learn it. I'm not going to debate stupidity. I was probably a bit more pissed off than I should have been. Kind of venting now, so forgive me, folks. But dude, it was a rough day out there in Dumbistan. So I'm just gonna breeze through like a quick thing in the New York Times. I didn't even have time to really go through articles. Looks like there's a heat wave in the east, and you know, my part of Georgia, 92 degrees. That was that's like par for the course in Georgia in in July. It should be hotter. But New York hits 100 degrees as heat wave stifles eastern US. And apparently, it's hot over in Europe. I was hearing Arowella complain. You know what? I'm not going to make that joke about Somali, the Sahel, and a woman of Somali heritage complaining about heat. That would just be a tad racist. So I'm going to not exercise my right as an American and make some dumb or racist comment. How about that? So um that's really the only story that I have that's of interest. And then this, I'm gonna have to listen to a little bit of this. In tumultuous term, Chief Justice Roberts took charge of unruly Supreme Court. Was it really that unruly? Hmm. You know what? Oh, this is totally my bad. You know what? I am so sorry. Uh, talk about technical difficulties. This is in tumultuous term, Chief Justice Roberts took charge of unruly Supreme Court. Um, I it was tumultuous, but part of it was Trump making it tumultuous. He did a lot of testing of things like tariffs, Voting Rights Act. Yep, that was tumultuous, and I just don't agree with the decision, but it is what it is. This will be the Roberts Court, and he will go down in history is holding it down. But the problem I feel is that in a way, it's worse on some of the justices that are Trump appointees or just on the right in general. It's like, I read this article yesterday about, people being pissed off at Amy Coney Barrett. So these Republican leaning justices can't be free to render a decision on the law and interpret it. It has to be pro Trump all the time. Dude, I kind of feel sorry for those justices. Like, I haven't heard any of, and I'm sure it must have been, or maybe I missed the story, but it seems like Kavanaugh and Barrett, oh, their lives seem to, be swatted a lot more than the left leaning justices. Kind of sad. It's tough to be MAGA. So, last news article, and then I'm going to go back to videos. The link should be dropped if anyone wants to come up. Doesn't seem like it's going to be a long show. However, Mount Olive Pickle Company exits Great American State Fair over Confederate flag. Of course, Trump's Great American State Fair is going to have the stars and bars. Oh, by the way, Balba, America has no problems with race. Not at all. Not at all. So the Mount Olive Pickle Company says it decided to withdraw from the Great American State Fair in Washington, D.C. after a Confederate flag was included in an exhibit. The company told Nexstar's WNCT that they were invited to participate in the North Carolina exhibit. We are proud of our North Carolina roots, and we agreed to be part of an exhibit as presented to us that would represent the best of our great state, the company based in Mount Olive, North Carolina, said in a statement. North Carolina was one of several states that said they would not attend the fair due to budget constraints. However, they were still represented at the 16-day event after companies in the state stepped up. Nexstar Washington correspondent Gabrielle Caracciolo. Ooh, that is a mouthful. Caracciolo? The Confederate flag appeared in a video that played at the North Carolina exhibit. Mount Olive Pickle Company said they were unaware of that image was being used and have since pulled out of the display. Our company stands on values of human dignity, opportunity, and freedom, the company added in its statement. Well, here's the deal. Why would you be showing a Confederate flag in a video or otherwise on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence? There was no Confederacy. There was no Confederacy in 1776. Why is that flag even being shown? And we don't have a problem with race in America. We don't have problems at all. Balba. Death to traitors. What's up, Brian Nichols? All right, so let us move on. Let us show more criticism of the Supreme Court, particularly Clarence Thomas. That dude, oh boy, that young man.
Welcome to Advisory Opinions. I'm Sarah Isger. That's David French. We are together to discuss the end of the term. Yes, we got birthright citizenship. Yes, Donald Trump lost. And it was 194 pages. Oh, we also got the transgender athlete cases and the party coordination with candidates cases. So much to break down, David. Whew, this was a busy term.
Can I begin with a pre-apology? Okay, here's our my pre-apology. Hundreds of pages, dense writing. We have not been able to digest them all. So there might be a chance, however slight, listeners, that we get some of the details wrong on some of the concurrences, dissents, majority. We're processing. If we get something wrong, please tell us and we'll try to correct. But this is real time, guys. We're processing on the fly.
And if you would like to write a newsletter for SCOTUS Blog and you have had a federal appellate clerkship and have worked in high-level commercial litigation, send your resume over to scotusblog@thedispatch.com. We'd love to talk to you. And if you want to get the Advisory Opinions newsletter, head on over to the SCOTUS Blog website and sign up for the AO newsletter. You get the video, you get the summaries, all of the things in the newsletter for every episode. So, without further ado, let's do this. Well, David, I think we have to start with Trump v. Barbara. This is the birthright citizenship case, in case you've been living under a rock, in which case I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. Donald Trump, on his first day of office, signs an executive order redefining birthright citizenship. In short, not to include someone who was born on American soil, but to neither parent being a U.S. citizen. And we have the decision. It is 6-3, or maybe more accurately, 5-1-3 on some of the questions here. We have 6 justices, though, saying that Donald Trump's executive order does not fly, and 3 justices saying that it does. So that's the 6-3. But 5 justices saying that the executive order violates the 14th Amendment, that the birthright citizenship clause, all citizens born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction therein are citizens of the United States, and the state in which they reside means that neither Congress nor a president, for executive order purposes, can change that. That means someone born in the United States, except maybe to diplomats' kids. Justice Kavanaugh is saying that he thinks the 14th Amendment actually does leave open that possibility, that it's a much broader understanding of what it was allowing Congress to potentially do and define, but that Congress, when it passed a statute, in the 1950s, it actually was doing birthright citizenship for anyone born here in the United States. So a president cannot change that through executive order, but that Congress could. And then, of course, you have 3 justices, Thomas, Gorsuch, and Alito, the rise of my 333 from the ashes once again, saying that, yep, they believe that this doesn't violate the 14th Amendment, that Congress didn't say anything differently, and that this executive order would be totally valid. David, initial thoughts and feelings.
Well, first, just like the New York Knicks, you cannot count out 333. It was on the ropes. It was down 20 in the fourth quarter, and here it comes back. Another thing, wow, were we wrong? We spent the last part of the podcast saying, okay, we've got Justice Gorsuch upholding birthright citizenship for sure. And now how do you count to 5? And it turns out that he was in dissent. A couple of top line things. One, obviously, the 6-3 is sort of the top line takeaway, but I wonder if the more enduring takeaway is 5-1-3. And that the reason why I wonder if 5-1-3 is the more enduring takeaway is I honestly wonder if, Sarah, we now have one of our new court litmus tests. In other words, how, for many years, the centerpiece of especially the social conservative world was Roe v. Wade. And so the litmus test, and for social liberals as well, both had very different views. So the litmus test for years and years and years around judges was, what's their thought on Roe v. Wade? And I wonder if the core of the new right is around immigration more than abortion, if the new litmus test going forward will be, what about birthright citizenship? In part because it's so close now. It's five justices. So let me ask you this, is this an issue that kind of recedes now that it lost? Or is this an issue with enduring resonance where you might see some litmus testing?
I think expectations matter in politics. They may be the only thing in politics, by the way, but they clearly matter in Supreme Court world too, because I'm not sure now that we have the 194 pages. By the way, the majority opinion, only 50 pages. So 3/4 of the 194 pages are not the majority telling us what they think about this. Again, if you want to go off on some rabbit hole about Sarah saying there's too much writing, just overall, and then way too much sort of separate writing, this is my new poster child. 194 pages. We were wondering what was taking so long and why it would come out on the last day. Well, we have our answer. It's just so flipping long. And this whole thing has to be site checked, spell checked, all the checks in between. So yeah, I'm actually, I guess, surprised they got it out at all. But David, I think this takes us to like a bigger question. Is this even the most important decision of the term? Like when we, in 5 years look back on this term, will we actually say that tariffs was more important than this? Again, I get that it's 194 pages, but if the majority opinion is only 50 pages, that makes it actually one of the relatively shorter majority opinions of the term, with some very lovely sweeping language from the Chief Justice on the majesty of American citizenship.
Okay, let me tell you why the decision was only 50 pages, because it's cut and dried. Okay, you're going to have to take over 100 pages like Clarence Thomas did to tap dance and fucking cherry pick your way through a bad argument. It's right there in black and white in jurisdiction. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's plain, and domicile does not come into it. Parents are not born. Babies are born. The 14th Amendment says nothing about domicile, the first clause, nothing about domicile, nothing about the parents. It's very clear. And Kavanaugh's lame-brained bullshit about exceptions, he literally pulls the part about the 4 exceptions. The unifier about the exceptions is parents not born in the United States or being illegal. That's not going to work either. The 14th Amendment says nothing about domicile, nothing about parents, and you're not going to be able to get around that if you are an originalist or a textualist. It is so funny that Clarence Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, all these people will tell you when the shit is going their way that, hey, it's plain text. It's plain text, and they're inserting words into the 14th Amendment, and it's just not going to work. And the bullshit about Congress, not going to happen.
But frankly, it was kind of a, yep, 14th Amendment. We're going to look at some precedent. We're going to look at some history. But at the end of the day, the words say what they mean. And we're moving on, guys. And in that sense, because the majority and really the dissent don't grapple with that distinction of executive power versus Congress, it's really just about the constitutional question. I don't know that this decision is going to matter much or be cited much. I could be very wrong about that. But to your point of it being a litmus test, the expectation was that Trump would lose this case. Then Trump lost this case. I don't know. Maybe everyone's going to focus on other stuff.
The only reason I say litmus test is because it was close. So in other words, if you had a 7-2, if you had an 8-1, I think the issue's done. It's just dead. And then you've got people saying, well, if only the Supreme Court were 9 Clarence Thomases. And then it's sort of wistful, but with 5, do you say, okay, well, if we're thinking about and selecting the next Republican appointed judge, are we going to be looking at the universe of people who wrote and have written law review articles in favor of birthright citizenship? Are we going to be looking for people who wrote against birthright? So I'm thinking of this from a political standpoint. I think from a legal standpoint, you're right that tariffs was more important than this. I still think of tariffs as not just the most important case of the term, but maybe the most important case of the last 25 years for essentially the very nature of the republic that we live in. But had this one come out the other way, it would eclipse tariffs. But I think one of the differences is neither one of us, almost every serious court watcher, never saw this coming out any other way than it did. And to the extent there's any surprise here, it is the margin. And my question is, does that close margin change the stakes going forward?
Okay, so a couple things on that. One, Kavanaugh is still saying that Trump's EO doesn't fly. So in order for this case to matter, even if you did flip one vote, you would also need an act of Congress. Republicans don't have that right now. They're not even close. It hasn't even really been proposed in any serious legislative fashion. I know that there's been bills that have been written, but we ain't there yet. So I don't know why you'd focus on the court instead of Congress. Congress would need to pass that law first. But there's also this, if you will, problem, which is that you keep losing Gorsuch or Kavanaugh, Barrett, and the chief, basically, if you're on that side of the spectrum. So you've got to replace at least 2 of them to stand a chance of winning these. Needing to replace 2 justices for your side is a high order of business, and especially when Thomas and Alito, your solid votes, are the next ones most likely to leave the court. Then Roberts. Okay, so you need to replace Roberts to win some of these cases, but that only gets you one. Now you've got to both replace Thomas and Alito, not just with justices who are checking the box on birthright citizenship, but on whatever the next issue is 25 years down the road. I mean, Justice Thomas is a 1991 justice. Justice Alito is a 2005 or 2006 justice. 20, 30 years on the court. You couldn't have known that when you were appointing Justice Thomas that the issue would be birthright citizenship. So the idea that you're going to replace Alito and Thomas and you're going to nail it in terms of what the issue will be a quarter century from now, and that you're going to replace Roberts and check that box correctly, and you've still got to replace one of Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. I mean, no, I think that's not a realistic thing to work on. What it is a realistic thing to do, I suppose you're right about, is to complain about. Weirdly, though, the main complaints we've seen so far, and it's, the night is young, as they say, it's been all about Justice Barrett and about the betrayal of the quote unquote DEI hire and making it all about this gender issue, when in fact, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have also both ruled against Donald Trump in various cases consistently. Not always on the same side, but I just don't see the level of vitriol against them. And I can't figure out why it would all be against Justice Barrett, except for the very obvious difference between the three of them, why one of them doesn't look like the others.
So, yeah, I mean, one of my first thoughts when I saw the 5-1-3 alignment is Justice Barrett is going to catch hell from MAGA, not Justice Kavanaugh, not Justice Roberts. I thought very specifically Justice Barrett. And then it was Justice Barrett who was a deciding vote in the Mississippi Election Day case. And so again, Justice Barrett is getting an enormous amount, but she's not acting alone. The only thing that I can think of, aside from your obvious explanation, Sarah, which also dovetails with, of all the failing cabinet secretaries in the Trump administration, Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi are gone, and Pete Hegseth is still like bench pressing his way through, I suppose. But the only other thing that I could say, aside from the very obvious top line conclusion, is that a lot of people, it was a all hands on deck moment to push her through at the very end of Trump's first term. And I think there might be a feeling of like, we went to the wall for you, you need to deliver for us. And specifically from MAGA, that MAGA went to the wall for you.
Yeah. And to think that this is like some like political position. Who says the Supreme Court's not political?
And you need to deliver for us. And that's just fundamentally misunderstanding what is a judge, what is a justice. And so I would say that's the only thing I can think of other than your relatively obvious top line conclusion.
By the way, I've already gotten something really wrong on this podcast. I said it was 50 pages of majority. Nope, that included the concurrences. The actual majority opinion written by the Chief Justice for the court was 26 pages.
Well, Sarah, and this would be a great way to introduce talking about the opinion itself. When your focus is text, it's shorter. When your focus is history, it gets a lot longer, because then you have to have that giant, drawn out historical fight over the incredibly complex, messy history of a giant continent-sized democracy over 250 years. And that's where it gets really long and really agonizing. But if you're centering around text here and plain meaning of words on the page, this is a much easier case in my view.
All right, you were right. Let's get to the opinion here. And I'll read from the end of the Chief's majority opinion. Again, I'm on page 26 of what will be 194 pages of opinions. All right. Again and again, the dissents cast the common law as, quote, feudal, quote, medieval, a remnant of, quote, the darkness of the Middle Ages. That was not the view of the Reconstruction Congress. Where the dissents see feudalism, the framers of the 14th Amendment saw emancipation. By the time of the Glorious Revolution in 1688, in fact, the tie created by birth was less a duty than a right, the foundation of an ancient liberties of freeborn subjects. That is why Blackstone described the privileges owed to the natural born. That is why the colonists demanded the rights of Englishmen more than 250 years ago. And that is why abolitionists lauded the ancient and universal rule of citizenship by birth alone as an ordinance of heaven. Citizenship then and now was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every freeborn person in this land, citing the congressional debates. We keep that promise today. I mean, there's not a whole lot more to it. They basically, the text, the history, the precedent, and we're done. And again, it's only 26 pages. Everyone can read this very easily. The chief, if nothing else, is a very clear writer. So I commend it to you. Although again, I don't think the writing in this decision matters a great deal. There's no like secret turns or tricks. Frankly, not a whole lot for a podcast to cover.
Yeah, the majority opinion is very straightforward, and just very straightforward. It is text. What does subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean? And there it has elements of history, but it doesn't depend on history, and it has a lot of discussion of precedent. This is much more my understanding of sort of the way you do original public meaning, which is we got the text, and if the text is clear, we don't have to do much other work. And especially if we have a relevant precedent that buttresses the text. So here you had the text and you had a quite on point relevant precedent that buttressed the text. And the argument against all of that really was a double bank shot historical argument like Justice Thomas uses. And we can dive into that. It's a befitting Justice Thomas. It's a very rich, dense opinion, very thoughtful, very interesting, in my view, super wrong because of text. But I think that this is very indicative, Sarah, of some of the warnings that we have raised over the de-emphasis of text in the originalist project. And it felt to me like a very originalist opinion, the chief's opinion.
Okay, then we have a concurrence by Justice Jackson, with whom Justice Sotomayor joins. This was a bit of a tweak, if you will, to Justice Thomas. I write separately to respond to some of the themes in the principal dissent. That is Justice Thomas's dissent. Despite his longstanding endorsement of a colorblind constitution, Justice Thomas now surprisingly suggests that the citizenship clause was a race-conscious remedial measure relating only to freed slaves such as Dred Scott and those who shared with them certain characteristics. No other homeland called America home. It is for this reason, he says, that children who were born in the United States but to parents not domiciled here are not entitled to claim birthright citizenship. But that narrow vision of the 14th Amendment bears little relationship to the history of its ratification. Even worse, Justice Thomas's telling elides the entire point of the second founding. The Reconstruction Amendments were an anti-caste, anti-subordination reset for the nation, not a mere spot treatment for the dark stain of slavery. David, there's actually a lot to unpack in that paragraph. There's of course, Justice Jackson's general dissent from the majority of the court's reading of the 14th Amendment, that it was trying to create a colorblind America and a colorblind constitution after decades of slavery since the founding. I think that is a fundamental and really interesting and debatable and not obvious question that divides liberals from conservatives right now. Was the 14th Amendment meant to now have a colorblind constitution, or was it meant to create a remedial constitution to try to fix, not just end slavery, but to fix the badges and incidents and problems caused by slavery that, of course, we don't do. Instead, we do the sort of opposite with the Jim Crow era, moving through until the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s. Okay, that's number one, this fundamental disagreement. Number two, Oh, number two is this idea of the narrowness of Justice Thomas's dissent here in this case, right? Was it a spot treatment, the citizenship clause, and it's really only meant to apply to slaves? Look, Justice Thomas walks through the history and he has some receipts on this, right? Of course, there were these massive exceptions to the citizenship clause right after it's passed. Native Americans on tribal land, diplomats. Then we get to Kim Wong-ark, decades after the 14th Amendment. So there's the more specific take on the citizenship clause itself. Again, I don't think the citizenship clause is coming up again anytime soon. You kind of disagree, and I could be very wrong on that. But the purpose of the 14th Amendment just keeps coming up. Oh, it's affirmative action. It's the Voting Rights Act and gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. It's even the trans athletes case. All of this is about what is the purpose of the 14th Amendment? We're not going to be done with that debate anytime soon.
No, we're not going to be done with that debate. But I think that Roberts with a Jackson modifier has the better of the argument here, because one of the fundamental problems with, in my view, the Thomas version here is that yes, it's quite obvious that the intention of the 14th Amendment and the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendments was to provide citizenship, to provide equal citizenship for freed slaves. Absolutely. But the language is not exclusive to freedmen. It's not. It's very broad language. And so the question that regardless of whether you can pull out receipt after receipt after receipt of some people in the legislature saying, oh, this is all about freedmen, the language itself, the words on the page are broader. And Justice Jackson also has a lot of receipts about why the language was broader, and there was deliberate intention for it to be broader, and that there was other words that could have been used that were certainly known to them at the time that it would have made it much narrower. And so I think the broad reading, where I agree with Justice Roberts, is this is a colorblind constitution on its face. Where I agree with Justice Jackson is that itself was there were absolutely, people had race in mind when they created the new colorblind, when they created the colorblind reality in 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And so both of these things are working at the same time, but this was a lot more on their face. These amendments are a lot more than freedmen receive equal rights and equal citizenship. It's a lot more than that on its face. And anything that sort of goes back and tries to argue, well, that's what the originally was supposed to do. Well, then why is it not in the text? And this is what again, going back to sound originalism, the text has to be element 1, 1A, 1B, 1C.
Let's move to Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence. This is, in fact, just concurring in the judgment that Trump's executive order fails, but it is dissenting in terms of the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. I said that this was my take, although slightly different. I would have just reserved the 14th Amendment question and not answered it at all, because I think it's hard, and why would I get to it? And I would have just answered it on the statutory language. So I concur and dissent in part from Justice Kavanaugh's concurring and dissenting opinion. Let me read to you the part that I think is most important. Initially enacted in 1940, Section 1401A of Title VIII provides that persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof shall be nationals and citizens of the United States at birth. That statutory language mirrors the text of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, which was ratified in 1868, and similarly provides all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. This court's 1898 Kim Wong-ark decision interpreted subject to the jurisdiction language of the 14th Amendment. That decision adopted a general rule of birthright citizenship for those born in the United States, with 4 disparate exceptions for children of foreign sovereigns or their ministers, or born on foreign public ships, or of enemies within and during hostile occupation of part of our territory, and children of members of the Indian tribes. Importantly, the Kim Wong-ark decision treated those 4 exceptions as a closed set for constitutional purposes, meaning that Congress could not create other exceptions to birthright citizenship, although Congress could eliminate one or more of those 4 exceptions. In 1940 and 1952, Congress employed the exact language from the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, in comprehensive new immigration and naturalization laws that provided for birthright citizenship. Because 1401A uses the same language as the 14th Amendment, the statute has long been interpreted to adopt Wong Kim Ark's general rule of birthright citizenship, subject to the exceptions identified in that case. If Congress in 1940 or 1952 wanted to create new exceptions and thereby test Wong Kim Ark's statement treating the 4 exceptions as a closed set, Congress presumably would not have repeated the precise language that this court had interpreted in Wong Kim Ark to contain only those 4 exceptions. Stated more doctrinally, Congress must be considered to have adopted also the construction given by this court to such language and made it part of the enactment. Another clear statement rule for Congress, David, that basically we presume that Congress is aware of Supreme Court decisions and that if it wants to supersede a Supreme Court decision or abrogate a Supreme Court decision, we would expect them to speak relatively clearly in doing that. If they do not, we will presume that they are statutorizing. No, there's another word for that. But anyway, that they are simply adopting what the Supreme Court decided when using the exact same language. Now, he then goes on to say why he thinks the 14th Amendment does provide for a much more expansive choice for Congress, and that Wong Kim Ark is not controlling on all of that. But on the statutory stuff, I am so there with him.
Okay, I would be there with him if it was court has interpreted a statute and then Congress doesn't change the statute. But if it's the court interprets a constitutional provision and then Congress doesn't challenge the court's constitutional interpretation, that's where I'm sort of losing the plot here, because if the court has adopted a constitutional interpretation, then that's going to trump anything that the Congress would enact in contradiction to it. So if the Congress's assessment is this is what the 14th Amendment means, and so therefore we're enacting this, I don't get the reasoning that the Congress's failure to add additional elements that it would have thought were unconstitutional has anything to do with it.
I'm so glad you said that. It would not if we were talking about a different statute. But because we're talking about an executive order, a president can only act within the bounds of a congressional statute. Therefore, let's simmer this down a second. You have subject to the jurisdiction thereof in the 14th Amendment, and you have subject to the jurisdiction thereof in this congressional statute. Intervening between those two is a constitutional decision from the Supreme Court. So, do we think that the statute means something different, even though it uses the same language than the 14th Amendment's language? My answer is yes, because by that point, it was quite clear we had close to 80 years of birthright citizenship. So maybe an easier way to think about it is not to think about the Supreme Court's decision at all. But when Congress uses the subject to the jurisdiction thereof language, even though it's identical to the 14th Amendment language, it also was based on 80 years of having birthright citizenship. Therefore, we presume that if they wanted to change birthright citizenship, they wouldn't have just adopted the same language that for 80 years was guaranteeing birthright citizenship. Therefore, a president cannot act outside of the statute. He can only act within it. And so what Justice Kavanaugh is saying, again, just on the statutory part, Congress is free to enact a new law. Now, they can now, expand or change that definition of birthright citizenship, and then a president can enact that change through executive order. But a president cannot change Congress's definition of birthright citizenship in an executive order. How do you, I can't believe you don't agree with me on this.
I think we're talking past each other, because what Kavanaugh is saying is that the fact that Congress read Wong Kim Ark and then enacted a statute that had the exact same language the Supreme Court interpreted in Wong Kim Ark means that Congress was consenting to Wong Kim Ark when it did not have to. And I don't understand that. Because
Oh,
Wong
you're just
Kim Ark
saying it'd
is
be so like Congress isn't going to contradict the Supreme Court. They felt trapped by the Supreme
they felt trapped. This is not.
That doesn't matter for our purposes, though.
But it matters a great deal when he's saying that when I'm interpreting this statute, that if he's going to argue that Congress could have done more because the 14th Amendment, he disagrees with Wong Kim Ark, that's a whole separate thing. But to argue that the fact that Congress wrote a statute with the same language as Wong Kim Ark means that Congress could have done more, but chose not to. I guess I'm losing the plot here, because if Congress felt like it was constrained by Wong Kim Ark, the fact that Congress didn't add additional categories is irrelevant. It has no bearing on this conversation at all. And why would it be relevant for a Congress to sort of say, well, no, we disagree with Wong Kim Ark and we added new categories?
Well, guys, our hive mind is totally broken down.
Yeah.
I don't understand David, or David doesn't understand me, or neither of us understand Justice Kavanaugh, but we're going to move on and leave you guys with,
whatever that was.
Whatever that was. David, is there anything from the dissents? We do have several of them. We have a dissent from Justice Thomas, in which Gorsuch joins. We then also have Alito and Gorsuch filing separate dissents. Anything in those, I mean, they're very long, and we can presumably get to them later if, in other podcasts if need be. But the point was, the 14th Amendment this is Justice Thomas's point at least, is about domicile. And so if your parents are not domiciled here, then the children of those parents is not domiciled here. I guess that's the very simplest way of showing where it falls apart for me. The parents may well not be domiciled here. I think that's not conclusory, or not maybe even relevant to whether the child is domiciled here, because the child was by definition born in the United States. Again, I thought, based on the statutory language, for instance, and not getting to the 14th Amendment, there really could be some interesting statutes, for instance, to pass. And by the way, maybe there still could be, on someone who is here on a 1-month tourist visa, who comes 8 months pregnant and has no intention of staying and is going to fly back with their child. Then the child doesn't have an intent to domicile here either. But if you've been an illegal alien in the United States for 20 years and a child is born here, I think that child is domiciled here, regardless of whether the parents are domiciled here. So the domicile argument to me was not very persuasive.
Yeah. Hive mind restored. I'm with you. And I think another thing that made it not persuasive is that the concept of domicile was not an unknown concept in 1868. And it is not the word used in the Constitution. The word domicile is not there. So once again, I sometimes feel like I'm almost a broken record on this point. And that is, if you have language, if you have words on a page, and then your argument is going to depend on a different word on different pages that are not there, I think you're behind the 8 ball on that. And that's what I just kept thinking about, that because this was a domicile argument from Thomas for page after page after page after page. This sort of begins with him stealing a base to say subject to the jurisdiction thereof is basically synonymous with domicile. But if this distinction is so critical, why is domicile not used? So I'm with you on that. And I'm very curious, are you thinking about Gorsuch when you say it's really 5-1-2-1?
Well, if you're thinking about Congress passing a statute on birthright citizenship, Gorsuch agrees with Thomas's dissent. Alito writes separately. Gorsuch writes separately. Kavanaugh writes separately on the constitutional interpretation as well. And I don't think those all sit on top of each other perfectly in terms of what the 14th Amendment did mean by subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And therefore, Congress is in a bit of a pickle if they did think that they had 4 votes to, pass a statute and all they needed to do was pick off one more. That being said, I think my example is a really interesting one because it's the sort of narrowest version. Someone who comes on the 1-month tourist visa, has a child, has every intention to return to their home country. Therefore, the child was not intending to domicile in the United States. I think Congress could still pass that statute, and it would not be flouting a Supreme Court decision. I think it would be testing what the majority and the dissent said about what the 14th Amendment allows Congress to do. Again, can't do it through executive order. Don't want to hear it. But could Congress pass that law, David, and you wouldn't say, oh, look, the Republican Congress is ignoring, defying, whatever horrible words, the Supreme Court?
Yeah, when I get to the Gorsuch dissent, which is very interesting. It's short. But this last bit is very interesting to me, or not last bit, towards the, it's towards the end. He says, by definition, temporary visitors to this country do not choose to make a permanent home here, and their children thus cannot claim the privilege of citizenship. Because the executive order is lawful, at least to this extent, respondents' facial challenge must fail. So one of the questions, he's joining Thomas, but then he's also carving out this one particular area about temporary visitors. And I think that is the hardest call of them all, is the temporary visitors. I think if you're talking about, people here on visa overstays, people here, illegal immigrants, people who are attempting to domicile here, to go back to Thomas, to me, that's the easy call. I fly in for a long weekend and give birth and leave. That's the one. No, I'm with you, sir. I would not look at that as a Republican Congress defying the Supreme Court. And in fact, if you wanted to see a really interesting Supreme Court case that would be much more fascinating discussion to me historically and on every ground, it would be legislation targeting, birthright tourism.
This was always my beef with this case. It never should have been an executive order, and it never should have been this expansive of one. If Donald Trump's executive order had been this narrow about birthright tourism, it would have actually been a much harder, more legally interesting case, because now we're dealing with those 1940 and 1952 statutes. Ooh, that's much harder to say whether the executive order actually is just implementing an understanding of domicile, because domicile, the way I was taught it, is where you intend to stay, where you intend to be. So, for instance, I live in Virginia right now, but I am leaving for Texas. Am I still domiciled in Virginia for the next week? Ooh, that would be an interesting property question. But, the second I have moved to Texas, well, my husband is domiciled in Texas because he certainly intends to stay. But what if I really miss Virginia and I intend to go back secretly in my head? Where am I domiciled? Anyway, those are domicile questions. This constitutionalization of domicile versus the common law understanding of domicile, kind of a mess. Okay, David, we are on the trans athletes case. This is a traditional 6-3 decision along ideological lines. Justice Kavanaugh writing for the majority that, yes, the 29 states that have bans on transgender athletes participating in women's sports are constitutionally acceptable. We also had a concurrence from Justice Thomas and a concurrence from Justice Gorsuch. And then, of course, the dissenting opinion. David, to me, this is an appetizer of a case and frankly, an appetizer of a decision. So much of this decision to me seems focused on the next set of cases, which are the 21 states that allow transgender athletes to participate in women's sports. And the question for that next case that may in fact come next term, actually, will be whether states must ban transgender athletes from participating in women's sports because of Title IX. So, right, this is the constitutional question under the 14th Amendment. May you ban trans athletes? The next case will be, must you ban trans athletes under Title IX, which entitles women equal access to educational opportunities, including sports opportunities. We talked about the Second Circuit decision that was then taken en banc. But the initial panel decision was like the craziest thing I'd ever read. It said Title IX only guaranteed women the ability to compete, not the ability to win, which of course would turn Title IX on its head, because that would mean that women just needed to be able to allow to play men's sports. Like, you're welcome to play on the men's basketball team. I mean, you won't make the team and you can't win, but you were able to compete for a spot on the team. So see, we've met Title IX. Okay, so that's the fight to come. So much of every single part of the majority, of the concurrences, and most of all, the dissent is about the next case. It's about Title IX. Because once you decided in this case that the 14th Amendment doesn't ban states from banning trans athletes, that it allows states to ban trans athletes, we didn't need to get to Title IX. And yet, so much of this decision is on the interpretation of Title IX. Big picture thoughts.
So it's 6-3, but it's also 9-0. So you have concurring in parts of the judgment, which interestingly are around Title IX. So there's essentially a 9-0 for the idea that Title IX does not require biological male participation in female sports. And there's a 6-3 around the idea, does the Equal Protection Clause require additional analysis here? Is there some sort of heightened scrutiny that's required that hasn't been done? And so in this way, it's a very interesting case because it's both unanimous and classic ideological split at the same time. And I agree with you. There is a lot of positioning here, I think, not just for the next case on trans athletes, but you're continuing to have this jockeying over the 14th Amendment and transgender status. And I think that is like when you're Sotomayor reading from the bench, this dissent, I think there's a lot of concern amongst the three justices that essentially what's going to happen is that as a result of the jurisprudence from the majority, that there will be a lot of opportunity to target transgender individuals. And so they're trying to essentially make all determinations of transgender regarding transgender status be treated at like the Constitution treats sex distinction. So this is kind of you have a sort of a competing on this Title IX issue on this part of the case only, which is as it required to allow biological male participation. There's a lot of agreement. On the background 14th Amendment issue, which again circles back to some of the stuff we talked about with birthright citizenship, I think that's where this is really headed, with basically the three justices looking at the majority and saying, everything is Bostock. Everything is Bostock. It's all sex distinctions. And the majority looking back at the three justices and saying, well, no, Bostock is Title VII. Different civil rights provisions have different rules. And oh, by the way, the transgender individuals don't rise to the level of a suspect class or a quasi-suspect class under the 14th Amendment. And it's that 14th Amendment analysis that's the big sticking point right now.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think is worth noting, I'll see if you agree with me, the tone from the dissent, quite cordial.
Extremely.
We're not arguing over much. We're not even saying that under the Equal Protection Clause that these states couldn't ban trans participation. All we're saying is we would send it back down on, to look at different things and facts on the ground. This is not one of those strident ideological 6-3 where the majority says it must come out this way and the dissent says it must not come out this way. Not really. And David, you've said this so many times. This issue as a culture war issue, and specifically trans participation in women's sports, has so shifted so radically very quickly over the last few years. I think that is really reflected in all of these, in the 77 pages we got on this. The majority opinion, you will simply not be surprised about anything that's in there. There's one paragraph from Justice Kavanaugh that I thought was worth reading here at the very end. We hold that the states may maintain women's and girls' sports for biological females. They may determine eligibility for women's and girls' sports based on biological sex. The Constitution and Title IX do not require an overhaul of women's and girls' sports throughout America. In so ruling, we emphasize one last point. Most of the biological female and transgender student athletes who are involved in transgender sports disputes around the country are teenagers or in their early 20s. Those student athletes want to play sports. Their desire to compete warrants respect. No student athlete on either side of the issue, whether a biological female or a transgender, deserves to be ostracized or vilified. Quintessential Justice Kavanaugh language there. Here's how we're ruling. Here's why. But also, everyone involved in this is a human worthy of our respect and dignity. And so lay off with the culture war stuff. So says the author of the majority. Let's go to Justice Thomas's dissent. A man does not have a legal right to compete against women just because he believes that he is a woman. First, transgender status is not a suspect class requiring heightened equal protection scrutiny. We talked about this extensively, David, and what, the limitations on heightened scrutiny. We've never added a class. Disability is not a class that gets heightened scrutiny, for instance. It is really race, religion, national origin. The end. And all sorts of groups over the last many, many decades have tried to raise their hand at one point or another and said, what about us? And the court time and again has said, nope, that party is shut. We are done doing heightened scrutiny. So interesting though, nobody joined that. Nobody needed to reach that. That is Justice Thomas on his own trying to make fetch happen to have this as an actual holding of the court, which it is not technically held yet, even though Justice Barrett in her concurrence in the Scarametti case, which was the transgender medical case, wrote about that as well. His second point. Second, as the court recognizes, this case concerns biological men and boys who identify as girls. Men and boys with gender dysphoria are not women or girls, even if they believe that they are. Sex is an immutable biological characteristic. It is binary, and man and woman, boy and girl are the terms that correspond to adults and children of each sex. To use language to obscure reality, to show indifference regarding the truth, is to lie to the public and cease to treat our fellow citizens as equals. It's a very short concurrence.
Yeah.
And again, no one else joined it.
No one else joined it. Weird that he put that second point. Interesting to me.
Yep.
Not really relevant to the legal understanding here. Felt a little culture war-y in a way. And look, the majority opinion, I think, stated quite clearly that Title IX is focused around biological sex because biological sex, not gender identity, is the relevant characteristic when evaluating the difference in athletic performance. That there are biological factors that dictate the differences. It is not ideological. It's not ideological factors. That if you're a trans girl, the fact that you are a trans girl does not then render the biology that you were born with, irrelevant. And so that's very basic. When I was writing about this for the New York Times, and I was a couple of years ago talking about this and making this argument, Title IX allows for sex segregation because of sex distinctions. And Title VI, even though they use very similar language, it prohibits racial divisions in sports because the irrelevance of race. And it requires sex distinctions in sports because of the relevance of sex. And so the gender dysphoria does not render sex irrelevant. Sex remains relevant. And I think that that's about as simple a way of describing this case as you can.
Well, then let's get to where the rubber really hit the road. In all of these 77 pages, everyone wanted to hear from Justice Gorsuch. He is the author of the Bostock opinion. And remember, that's 5-4, where Justice Gorsuch sides with the 4 liberal justices at that point. All of the other conservative justices are in dissent. So Bostock, as you said, was a Title VII case. Gorsuch writes, it's 6-3, Gorsuch and the Chief, along with Breyer, Sotomayor, and Ginsburg. And then the 3 are Thomas, Alito, and Kavanaugh. Okay. And this is about transgender status and sexual orientation and whether those are protected under Title VII, which says because of sex. So discrimination because of sex. And Justice Gorsuch is like, yeah, well, if you're wearing a skirt to work and someone fires you for that, it's because of your sex that they think you're male and therefore can't wear a skirt to work. That is arbitrary. Same with sexual orientation, right? They fire you because you married a man. Well, if you were a woman who married a man, they wouldn't fire you for that. Therefore, it's because of sex. And maybe Congress didn't know that that would be the application of the language, but this is an ambiguous language. So we use the text. We're done at the text. We don't need to look at anything else, and certainly not the purpose that Congress had. Pure textualism, not originalism. So what is Gorsuch going to say in the transgender case? Okay, he says 2 things. 1, Title IX was enacted as an exercise of Congress's powers under the spending clause. That provision of the Constitution does not allow Congress to regulate conduct. Instead, it only authorizes Congress to spend money. Of course, Congress may seek to condition the funds it gives to others. But much as with any contract, a funding recipient must voluntarily and knowingly assent to those conditions for them to bear any legal force. And for a funding recipient to provide that kind of assent, Congress must clearly and unambiguously specify the conditions it expects the funding recipient to follow. His point being, because Title IX is a spending clause statute, if Congress wanted to prevent states from banning transgender athletes, they had to condition the funding on that clearly. Again, clear statement rule, but now it kind of goes in the other direction. This spending clause stuff, not the last we're seeing of it, although clearly Justice Gorsuch is the one hot to trot on that. But then we get to the second point, and that's the part we were all waiting for. Second, Bostock supports, not undermines the court's conclusion. I'll just say, David, right off the bat, I don't think it undermines this case, but I'm not sure it supports this case. I think it is just totally different than this case.
I think it's just totally different. Yes.
Different facts, different conclusions. There, we face the question of whether firing an employee for being homosexual or transgender amounted to discrimination because of sex in violation of Title VII, and then goes through explaining what I explained. All of that is consistent with the course the court takes today. Title IX prohibits various types of discrimination on the basis of sex. The court understands the term sex in Title IX to mean biological sex, just as we understood that term in Title VII in Bostock. Likewise, the court does not question that on the basis of is perhaps but a synonym for because of, and thus does not require biological sex to be the sole cause of discrimination, just as we held in Bostock. The difference between this case and Bostock is that we face here a question that wasn't present there. In Bostock, again, no one doubted that firing someone because of his biological sex qualified as discrimination under Title VII. Here, though, we face the question whether it qualifies as discrimination under Title IX for a federal funding recipient to sponsor sports teams restricted to biological women or girls alone. And for the reasons just laid out, it does not. David, I think he's spot on here. I do think Bostock is a totally different question, and I don't really understand the arguments to the contrary, frankly.
I'm completely with you. Bostock is very different. I think that where you would draw comparisons between Title VII and Title IX would be in a very, very narrow area of Title VII, which is called the bona fide occupational qualification, which in other words, race or sex or et cetera, religion are not supposed to matter unless there is some part of the sex distinction or the religion distinction, for example, that is fundamental. So, for example, in the religion context, having a religious entity hire someone of a different faith would be an overreach. Similarly, even though workplaces must provide equal opportunity under Title VII to men and women, that doesn't mean shared bathroom spaces, for example. So there are certain circumstances, even under Title VII, where sex distinctions will matter, and perhaps even not recognizing the sex distinction could create a Title VII issue, such as, for example, if women did not feel safe in a bathroom in a workplace, that would be a Title VII issue, even in where you're recognizing sex as part of treating the sexes equally. Okay, does that make sense? And so with Title IX, you're recognizing sex as part of treating the sexes equally. And so that's where, so for the 99.9% of Title VII related issues, it's just two ships passing in the night compared to this, where you're really saying and you're circling around the notion that sex requires different treatment, not that sex requires the same treatment.
That does make sense. Well, we've got another 6-3 in National Republican Senatorial Committee versus Federal Election Commission. Kavanaugh, again, writing for the majority, and it's along ideological lines. David, this was the case about whether political parties could coordinate with their candidates. Now, here's what the case is not about. It is not about individual contribution limits, how much you can give to a candidate. It is also not about how much you can give to a political party, which is also subject to contribution limits. It is only about whether, after you've given that money to the party and after you've given that money to the candidate, can the two of them then speak to one another? Parties up until now have had limits on how much they can coordinate with their candidates. After that, it has to be an independent expenditure. As a former political operative, I have made the case that this gives rise to and power to super PACs, something that no political operative in the country, unless you're getting paid by a super PAC, actually thinks are good things in our campaign ecosystem. Why? Because super PACs are independent expenditure units without contribution limits, and parties are independent expenditure units with contribution limits. So why would you ever give to the party instead of the super PAC? By getting rid of the coordination limit between parties and candidates, I would argue we are going to weaken super PACs, which is a good thing. These are all policy arguments. We'll get to the legal ones in a sec, but we're going to weaken super PACs and I potentially make political parties much more powerful in the ecosystem because they will now have real carrots and sticks for these candidates to prevent the kind of splinter groups, whether it's DSA or Tea Party, from taking over political parties, not that share their ideological and policy goals, which is the purpose of a political party, but instead to basically use the red hat or the blue hat to win elections on things that are often orthogonal or completely contradictory to the stated policy goals of the organization of the political party. I've made this argument before that we killed off political parties with BICRA in 2002, the campaign finance legislation. This doesn't solve all of the problem because what BICRA did was get rid of the slush fund, basically, that political parties would have. That's still gone. But by allowing the coordination limits to fall, parties can buy advertisements at much cheaper rates than super PACs can. So not only can the candidate now coordinate with their party, the party can buy them TV ads at a much cheaper rate. And so working with the political party will now be an advantage for candidates. And therefore, political parties will be able to carrot and stick the candidate that they want to actually carry their banner. If this rule had been in place in 2015, could the Republican National Committee have prevented Donald Trump from winning the Republican nomination? No, I don't think so. But there's a lot of other closer calls. Where I think it absolutely, if this decision had been in place, lots of different candidates in both parties would not have won if the parties had been able to coordinate with their candidates. I'm actually surprised if the policy considerations were really the most important thing. I'm actually kind of surprised it would not be 9-0, because I was thinking, I was just talking about this just moments ago, and I said, look, free speech, the free speech clause of the First Amendment, if it means anything, it's to protect political speech. Now, of course, it's not to protect only political speech, but it is to protect political speech. And what we have done is we've created a campaign finance labyrinth that often regulates political speech more than almost any other kind of speech in some interesting ways. And so what this does is it takes aim at, and this coordination issue, I think, takes aim at one of the core issues that is negatively impacting our democracy, which is political parties have essentially been hollowed out as having any kind of real independent power, both by their own decisions and by court cases like this one, or the previous cases that had limited their ability to coordinate with their own candidates. I mean, this is wild that would be considered like a firewall against corruption, that Democrats have limits on coordinating with other Democrats to win elections. And so from that standpoint, one of the things that's so unhealthy about our democracy is it is too complicated to participate in it. Complexity is a subsidy. The wealthier you are, even in the absence of, even with strict campaign limits, you're much more able to figure out how to navigate the whole thing. And then these bans on consultation between political parties and candidates mean that political parties have less power. They're beholden more to populist uprisings. And no, I'm on the policy front. To me, this is an easy case. On the constitutional front, it's actually less interesting to me because I just feel like we need to rip up the whole thing.
Like, it's just so bad. The whole labyrinth that we have, we need a reboot. But I mean, I agree with the decision. It's just, man, Sarah, I've been thinking about first and writing about and litigating the First Amendment forever. And I promise you, when campaign finance comes up, I have trepidation even talking about it because it's so complicated. And I'm like, okay, I'm so glad Sarah's on this podcast because she's been doing this forever. When I did Evangelicals for MIT, I would sometimes lay awake at night, worried that I had crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. That's absurd. Like, a group of private citizens should be able to form a group to help their favorite candidate without laying awake at night that their good faith effort to contribute to American democracy is going to land them in federal prison or have some sort of major federal fine imposed.
Okay, so let's move to the law then, right? The question is, under the First Amendment, can Congress pass a statute barring parties from coordinating with their candidates? And the 6 justices say, no, that is unconstitutional. And the 3 justices are like, yeah, sure, why not? So I wanted to read the part that I found most persuasive. And we did talk about this before, if you want to go back to the oral argument and the history of these campaign finance cases. But the underlying point is that the Supreme Court held in Buckley that preventing quid pro quo corruption and the appearance of quid pro quo corruption was an acceptable ability for Congress to pass limitations on, for instance, individual contribution limits. And then all of this grew up around it as helping that underlying reason that even though this might violate the First Amendment in some sense, sort of under a strict scrutiny type analysis, it overcomes that compelling state interest, right? Preventing quid pro quo corruption or the appearance thereof, and to narrowly tailor to do that, individual contribution limits. Buckley struck down spending limits, for instance, as not meeting that. So this is from the majority now. The base limits on contributions to candidates serve as an initial prophylaxis against quid pro quo corruption or its appearance in this context. After all, most contributions to candidates are not given in exchange for some official action. The earmarking rules constitute a second prophylaxis. The disclosure requirements supply a third prophylaxis. So prophylaxis upon prophylaxis upon prophylaxis already serve to prevent quid pro quo corruption or its appearance. The political party coordinated expenditure limits at issue here would operate as a fourth line of defense. Such a prophylaxis upon prophylaxis approach requires that we be particularly diligent in scrutinizing the law's fit. But the fourth prophylaxis imposes a severe and direct restriction on free speech and infringes fundamental First Amendment values. Otherwise stated, the restriction on political party coordinated expenditures is disproportionate and is not necessary and narrowly tailored to the government's interest in preventing circumvention of the base contribution limits. I mean, yup. Now, you want to talk about another policy consideration. It's the circumvention problem, David. It's this idea that now you're going to give the $44,000 to the party, and then the party is going to spend all that on the candidate of your choice, and you've circumvented the $3,500 individual contribution limit to the candidate. But that's the earmarking point, right? We already have a prohibition against doing that, earmarking your $44,000 contribution to only help Ken Paxton. So you would have to violate the earmarking provision to even get to the need to stop coordination. Again, I think the result of this will not be some sudden circumvention problem, though I don't doubt to some extent, depending on how you think of circumvention, sure, a lot more people are going to give $44,000 to the party to help all of these candidates. But it's not going to be to circumvent the individual contribution limits to candidates. It's going to be because the parties now actually play a role in this whole thing.
So I'm so glad you brought up Buckley. That's our original sin right there. And it's not trying to ban quid pro quo corruption. That's like a bribery statute. That's banning, quid pro quo corruption, bribery, zero problem with that. It's when you get into what does it mean to have the appearance of quid pro quo corruption? That is the barn door through which all of the horses have escaped, because that is so subjective. That is so much in the eye of the beholder. And then that has created this whack-a-mole circumvention issue, because you do one thing to try to close down the appearance of corruption, and then very creative people come up with other legal structures that allow them to spend money to participate in the political process. And then that creates, oh, wait, does that create an appearance of corruption? And then so you end up smack every single circumvention when you already have bribery statutes. And you're really going after this very amorphous, difficult to define appearance of impropriety kind of standard as a compelling governmental interest to override political speech. And that's my problem right there.
So let me read you a little bit from the dissent. For over half a century, a federal statute has guarded against actual and apparent quid pro quo corruption in our political system by limiting the amount of money a donor can contribute to a candidate. The law's theory is simple. A candidate may be induced to trade official acts for campaign contributions, and the bigger the contribution, the stronger both the candidate's temptation and the public's suspicion. The same statute also prevents circumvention of those contribution limits by capping political parties' coordinated expenditures with candidates. When a party makes such a coordinated expenditure, it essentially pays the candidate's bills, stepping up to fund something the candidate would otherwise have to. Without limits on those expenditures, a candidate could ask a donor to make a substantial contribution to the party so as to finance his own campaign expenses. It would then be as though the candidate contribution limits did not exist. The donor could give far more to the party than to the candidate directly, understanding that the money would be passed through to the candidate. And with that evasion of contribution limits, all the opportunities for quid pro quo deals would come back into play. So Congress, sensibly enough, limited coordinated expenditures. By thus preventing circumvention of the basic contribution limits, Congress protected those limits' capacity to suppress corruption. Here's the thing, David. I mean, I do disagree with that. Fine. But I feel like everyone should agree that this system has failed.
Yeah.
The system we created in 2002 has simply failed, and we should start over. I don't even disagree, I think, with a lot of the goals of the left when it comes to campaign financing. The actual goals being the prevention of corruption and the distortion of political speech in the country, by things that are not representing most Americans, the extreme distortion. Great. Can we all admit, though, that this hasn't worked, and that distorting the First Amendment further and further and further to try to make this work also hasn't worked? And so maybe we should let the First Amendment do its job. And then if we need more statutes, great. I am on board to sit at that table and compromise and all of the things. But stop trying to Band-Aid BICRA. It's not getting their goals accomplished. It's not getting my goals accomplished. It certainly hasn't made our political ecosystem healthier. It's made it sicker and sicker and sicker. And so to say like, well, the First Amendment should be the one to bend to try to make BICRA work, nothing is going to make BICRA work.
Well, one thing I keep going back to is all of this, much of it designed to limit the effect of very wealthy people and their participation and their disproportionate impact on American politics, has resulted in furthering the disproportionate impact of very wealthy people. Not just in the Elon Musk if he wants to, he could spend $20 billion on his own super PAC, messaging and all of this stuff. Yes, that is still out there. And a lot of people are saying, no, we would fix that too if we could just regulate more. But every new thing, every new layer of regulation, think of it this way, every new layer of regulation benefits rich people. It just does. It's absolutely the case. Every new layer benefits rich people. Complexity is a subsidy. It's one of the great insights of the libertarian movement. And that the more complicated you make this, the more you narrow political participation. And I know that is not the intent of this. The intent is actually to broaden political participation. But Sarah, here's my question. Ultimately, are all of these efforts going to keep running into a First Amendment firewall? And if you want to do something different, are you just going to have to amend the Constitution and say, okay, we're going to broadly protect political the speech, as in words, printed words, But when it comes to money, we're going to publicly finance or have overall caps per race. In other words, does it ultimately just require, in a congressional race, no candidate can spend would it just require a constitutional amendment if you want to do this? Because right now it just seems to me that this layer upon layer is just running against a firewall of a First Amendment that, if it means anything, protects political speech.
I'm going to take that question with me and really think about a law that Congress could pass that would meaningfully contribute to this, that would not require an amendment. So we're going to leave it there on this case. And David, this was a lot of pages to digest. We're going to have a lot more to say about the end of the term cases that always get kind of short shrift per case. As we continue in July, in our July episodes, we've got our term review with Professor Akhil Amar and David Latt coming up, and lots more episodes for just you and I to break this down and find some special guests to maybe come join us. We also had the cleanup orders list come out today, where the Supreme Court granted cert on the question of whether assault rifle bans are constitutional under the Second Amendment. And we had some other cert grants from the orders list the day before. So we're behind is the point. We know we're behind. And by the way, the drama this morning as NPR misreported that Justice Alito was retiring. Whoa. I've got some behind the scenes on that we'll get to next time. But as of this recording, which at this point is late afternoon in Washington, D.C., we would have expected to hear something from the Supreme Court. So at least at this moment, no retirement plans from any of the justices. So we can stop doing that, at least for another year, probably.
Yep. Maybe I would say probably longer if the Republicans lose the Senate.
We shall see. And by the way, CNN misreported the outcome of Watson on air earlier this week. So a lot of drama in legal media world, but that was so meta. I didn't want to talk about it instead of actually getting to the heart of these cases. So all to say, we know we're behind. We've got lots more to cover. We will have more episodes starting next week. In the meantime, the most important thing that you can do as an American, whether you're mad about partisan gerrymandering or super pumped about the NRSC opinion or everything in between, go celebrate the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We are the longest running written constitution in the world to date. And as Ben Franklin said, it's only a republic if we can keep it. And part of that is just putting all this aside and thinking about how freaking lucky we are to be Americans.
I mean, if you can agree that we're endowed by our Creator with certain, all men are created equal, and we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you've got something to celebrate because you live in a country that, regardless of however much we deviate from that beautiful idea, it is the North Star. It is the founding statement of this country. It's a beautiful statement. It's a beautiful idea. And I, for one, am celebrating that American creed without reservation.
And no matter what differences you may have on political beliefs, race, religion, or anything else with your fellow Americans, if you believe that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, they are your brother.
Yep. And
no more so than on the 4th of July. So go enjoy, everyone. We'll see you next week.
What is she babbling on about? No, they're not my brother, unless they're my brother. So in any case, I'm going to wrap this up, folks. Would have been a longer show, but I got wrapped up in tomfoolery on other panels today. So I will be back tomorrow, probably, hopefully on time around 4:30. So everyone have a good night.